I just always felt wherever I went, I kind of felt, I don't know, so unique. Like I had this, it almost felt a bit like a magic, like a supernatural element to me.
All right, first off, my voice is on the ropes today. I've got a cold or something, so I'm really raspy. Second thing, holy crap, this podcast saw a really, really good uptick in listenership in the past week, and that's 100% thanks to you. Spreading the word, sharing it with people. And speaking of which, I've got emails and tweets from multiple people in the past week saying that the episodes so far, including the last one with Jonah, inspired them to tell people around them for the first time that they have Tourette Syndrome. Just come out of the Twitch closet, and it's more about awareness now than being afraid of stigma. That's what these people were telling me. Jonah, as a matter of fact, and hang on, if you haven't heard Jonah's episode, that's episode 5. Please go back and listen. Remember, during Jonah's interview, he said that he just never really talked to anybody else with Tourette Syndrome about Tourette Syndrome. When his episode aired, he tweeted, "Hello, everyone. A lot of you know me. Most all of you don't know I have Tourette Syndrome. I have for a long time kept that to myself, until I met Tourette's Pod." That's the Twitter handle for this podcast. "And found a community I've never known." That felt amazing to read. Same here, I never knew this kind of community until this year. And if this is your first time listening, I mean, it's just so awesome where everyone has taken this project. And this episode, goes all the way to Australia. We're talking with Vaya, who herself is a podcaster, which makes this show kind of special because she was able to record her end of the conversation on her own microphone, so it sounds like we're recording in the same room together. That's what the industry calls a double ender. Sometimes when you're listening to interviews on the radio, they're not in the same room. They record in different locations with their own microphones, and then they put the audio together, and that's what's called a double ender. So we sound like we're in the same room, but she's up at 11 p.m. in Australia, and I'm up at 7 a.m. on the East Coast of the U.S. to make this interview possible. It's a lot of fun. There's also a special extra to this episode, which we'll get to. But let's go ahead and start the whole thing off.
My name is Vaya Pashos. I am 35. I'm from Melbourne, Australia. Melbourne is not the capital. It's Canberra's the capital, but neither is Sydney. So south of Australia is where I'm from. And I work freelance for the TV industry here. Currently, I am a quiz question writer for a TV show. I somehow found myself writing quiz questions for a living. So I've worked for a few different game shows now. So I'm on that current role at the moment. Who knows what I'll do next?
I mean, that's such a cool job. I mean, how did you end up there?
I have a background in radio and live comedy. So I was trying to, just make a living in the entertainment industry and was working in commercial radio and getting a little bit fed up with the restrictions in commercial radio. It's very sales driven and you don't get much scope to be creative. And so I was looking to move over to TV. So I started as a researcher on a couple of different shows, and then and a lot of contacts that I'd made through stand-up comedy I found in TV. And so, that was about 2009. I transitioned over from radio to TV, and now I freelance and jump around to different projects and research, assistant produced, writing's sort of my main focus. But trying to fill the gaps wherever I can.
Oh, that's so. I mean, are you kind of do you have a research type role when it comes to writing questions, or is it more? How does that work?
You just kind of build it however you want to build it. So the current show I work on is called Hard Quiz, and it's a comedy quiz show, and the contestants come to you with their specialty topic. So you might say, my specialty subject is Tourette Syndrome, or my specialty subject is Charles Dickens or something. And then we have to become experts in your topic as the writers, and we prepare a series of questions. So basically you just do a deep dive into one particular narrow subject field, and then try and challenge the contestants, and then put jokes in where you can, make them funny as well. But I just sort of delve into that world and read up on it, and then you just try and pan for gold and try and find things that are going to jump out at you and entertain people and challenge people.
So, okay, I'm curious about your radio background.
Yes.
So was this live on air radio, or was it something that you would put together and edit? And I guess I'm curious about that because of, ticking, and if that interferes at all.
Well, it was a bit of everything. So I sort of started from the ground up. I started, firstly in community radio over here. I'm not sure what the equivalent where you are is, I suppose, public radio.
Yeah.
Community radio. So it's volunteer. It's voluntary work, a lot of it. And I started on a Greek program on an ethnic community station in Melbourne because I've got a Greek background. And then I trained up in community radio there, and then I went over to a youth station. And then after that, I went into commercial radio as the receptionist because you've got to start wherever you can. So I took a receptionist job, and then from there asked to answer the phones for someone who was sick, filling in for someone who was sick and answering the phones for one of the radio shows. And then from there got an assistant producer job. And then after that, I started to become a casual announcer on the weekends. But that was a lot of pre-recorded stuff. So I would just pre-record it. And also I don't really tick on air. Like while we're talking now, it's probably not going to come up. I may have done it at the start when we were chatting, but I might be clearing my throat a little bit, which I'll get into more. But I've noticed this ever since I was younger. When I'm on stage, quote unquote, I'm sure this is common for a lot of people, that I can keep the tics at bay because I'm hyper-focused in that zone.
Yeah.
That wasn't always the case. There was video of me when I was about 8 or 9 or 10 years old on stage at there's this activity called calisthenics here in Australia, which is like a form of dancing, gymnastics type of thing. And I used to do that. And there is video of me when I was really young. You can see sort of my head twitching on stage. And over the years that I sort of snapped out of that as you learn stage presence and putting on that persona. So that was very rare in those early days that happened.
So in those early days, I mean, had you been diagnosed yet?
No, I officially got diagnosed at age 12. I was in grade 6 in Australia. That's primary school. That's the last year of your junior school years. And then when you're 12, 13, you start year 7, which is classified as high school, which I guess is middle school in your part of the world. So just before high school. And the thing is, my mum has it too. Both my mum and I have it. Have a very mild case. So I don't know what, I probably could have asked her, but I didn't. I'll find out and let you know.
Hey, it's Ben in my present day raspy voice. She actually did get up with her mother and got some answers, recorded them, and sent them to me.
Hello?
You there?
Yep.
Hello. There we go.
Hey, Mum, quick question. Do you remember when you first noticed my Tourette's tics?
I think we started to notice around about grade 4 that certain things were starting to happen, little things. And then in grade 5, it was starting to get worse and more noticeable. And I think at that point, I kind of I figured it out. I knew what was happening.
Yep. So that was when I was around 10 or 11.
Yeah.
And now you have Tourette's as well.
I do.
So how come you didn't notice sooner? Or did you suspect but you weren't sure?
Well, it doesn't always manifest right away. It usually manifests towards the end of the first decade, sometimes into the teens. It doesn't always manifest early. And because I was never formally diagnosed, I guess I was assuming I knew what was happening until it was too obvious to ignore. And with television and internet and information, I actually started to learn and recognise it when it was happening to you.
So how did you realise you had it?
Well, the same way. It was just hearing about it. It's references on TV, on the internet, wherever else. It started to become something people talked about, which was never the case when I was young. And you just self-diagnose and you think, yep, this is what I have. But never having taken it further, I never realised it was a genetic thing and that it could be passed on and all the rest of it.
So how old roughly were you when you realised you had it?
Well, I didn't realise what I had. I was told I just had bad habits, and I was the same age, 19 years old.
Okay, same age as what?
When you started to develop the tics, about the 9-10 year age.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but in my case, they were just saying I had bad habits and had to get rid of them.
But when you officially heard the term Tourette's, when do you think that was for you?
I never heard it in relation to me.
Ah.
I began to hear it when it started to look like it was becoming relevant for you. I didn't know the word until that point. It was never relevant. I just had managed my whole life thinking I just had a problem.
Ah, okay. That's weird because I, for some reason, thought I had them much younger. Maybe I had them smaller ones.
It's possible you were manifesting the occasional tic, but Tourette's is sometimes provoked by stress, and as you got older and school was a little bit difficult for you at that time, there was a few things going on, and so that stress would have maybe provoked stronger tics at that time that started to become noticeable. And then as they became noticeable and people began to notice and people began to comment on it, it made it worse for you. So there was this vicious cycle at the time.
Yeah.
Well, there was nobody, when I was 9, which is 50 years ago actually, nobody was talking about Tourette's. They just talked about habits and, annoying behaviours. There was no title. And certainly in my family, my culture, it wasn't the sort of thing you took your child to a doctor for. You took them to a doctor if they cut off their arm, but pretty much nothing else.
And do you remember after we got diagnosed when I was around 12, do you remember what the course of action was in terms of treatment? I can't remember that very well. I remember I spoke to a psychologist a couple of times, but...
I'm surprised you don't remember it because your reaction was so violent. He offered some drugs that would help slow down the tics but would also somewhat impair your function. It might make you a bit drowsy, might make you a bit, dozy, and you immediately just said no. Okay. And refused, to the point where you had to leave the room. You didn't want to talk to the neurologist anymore about it. You were very upset about it.
I went on them eventually, didn't I, a few years later, for a little while?
I don't believe you ever did. If you did, it would have been... No, to be honest, mate, I really don't think you did. You were so adamant about not doing it. Unless you did it later in your teens when you had more independence, I'm not aware.
Okay, I don't remember.
No, you were just so adamant, and especially as you were progressing through high school, you were determined not to be drug affected as you tried to get through, your later year 10, 11 and 12. You just didn't want...
Oh, interesting.
Well, it stands out because you were so strong in your position about it, whereas I kind of watched you and I thought, I think I would have given up by now and taken the drugs. In many ways, I had wished somebody had offered them to me and saved me all of the harassment and bullying that I had suffered. But you were so strong and you had such good friends around you and they were so strong that you got yourself through it somehow. I don't know how.
Well, I don't know. Maybe if I took my time again, I might take them. I don't know what I was thinking at the time.
Well, you were thinking what was best for you at the time, and that was best for you at the time. You look at how you performed in school. You did brilliantly without the drugs, and the drugs may have, in fact, been detrimental to your performance as it was. You're a genius.
Oh, thanks.
Well, you were.
All right, thanks, Mum. Appreciate
it. My pleasure. I'm very proud of you.
Oh, that's very nice. Thank you. That's my mum, Maria.
I love that. All right, let's pop back to me and Vaya. At this point, I'm asking her what changed or what happened after her diagnosis.
The biggest change for me was the empowerment of the diagnosis, just the knowledge of it. So we met with a pediatrician and then a child psychologist, not long-term, just a few sessions with the psychologist, especially as I was starting high school or middle school. So it was a brand new school. I was the only person from my old school at this new school. It's a big turning point for people in that age range. And we were moving house that year, so there were a lot of changes and a lot of stress. And the first half of year 7, I was, getting picked on a bit for it, and I'm sure we'll go into that, as I'm sure most people experience. But it was that moment of getting an official diagnosis when I started actually telling the girls at school, because it was all girls' school at the time, I would actually explain what I had, and that was that kind of immediately put a stop to a lot of the comments, and I was really empowered by that, just saying, hey, I have a disorder. It's a neurological disorder. I can't help it. It's called Tourette's. When I make those movements, I can't help it. And then as soon as that happened, I remember there were some rumors like, oh, Vaya's got this disease and she's going to die from it, or like that got out of hand. And so I had to say, no, actually it's fine. But that helped a lot, because a part of the problem in primary school when I was younger is that you just have nothing to combat those comments with. It's just, this is how I am. I just have to take whatever's thrown at me. But suddenly this is a tangible thing that you can explain to people. It's got a word, and it's, and then there was, I think I was on some medication for maybe a year or so, not long term, because I guess I don't know, there was not really much to do, not much that I could do. But we just we cut back a bit on my caffeine intake. As a teenager, there wasn't, coffee culture hadn't exploded. So really it was just try not to drink so much Coke or eat so much chocolate. And that was about it. And then, I sort of stopped. I just never researched it after that. Like there was, we got a few pamphlets for like a youth group with other kids that had Tourette's, and I just had no interest in that. That stressed me out quite a lot, talking about that. I just didn't want to be around other kids that had it, because and even these days, I don't like to watch, if there's a documentary about it on TV, it's it sets me off. It sets my tics off, and I can get a bit uncomfortable. So one of the few things I did is I followed a few Twitter accounts that share information, and I found that a really great way to sort of stay connected, get information, not have to consume a whole chunk of footage, or just like I can get little bites of information at my own pace. And then
sure.
That's how I heard about your podcast. And so
I hope this discussion isn't, setting anything off or defeating anything for you.
No, and actually, even if it does, it's not even a problem. It's just, I don't know what it is. And I think it must happen a lot with all sorts of disorders. I've got a friend who has ADHD, and I found this amazing YouTube channel called, I think it's called ADHD and Me, and I was telling her about it, and I knew she wouldn't watch it. I just knew, she's like, I don't think I can watch that, but maybe I'll pass it on to my friends. So sometimes if it's too close to you, you just don't want to hear it. And there's a bit, as I'm in the creative industry, I'm a writer, sometimes I can feel a bit of a loss of control hearing other people tell the story, I think. I don't know if I'm over psychoanalyzing, but it's usually totally fine. I just have avoided a lot of information about it.
Yeah, but have you always been kind of open? I mean, so when I was a kid, I kind of owned it too, but it was also because I didn't really have a sense of that, that there may be anything to hide, or that people may view it, too terribly oddly to where I would have to bottle it up. Later on, I did. I kind of retreated from it, and I just kind of kept it a secret. But when you told other kids and you felt like it was empowering, I mean, did that make that kind of permanent for you, or did you go through any sort of phase where you kind of kept it a secret for a bit, or?
It was permanent from about age 13 onwards. That was a big, huge turning point. Before 12 and under was a completely different story, mainly because I wasn't equipped with the diagnosis and the information, and also the maturity to be able to actually stop another kid who might be imitating me and say, hey, here is the reason why I am behaving differently to you.
Right.
So when you're, a child, you cry about it, or you run away from them, or you ignore them, or you trying to pretend you fit in with everyone else. So I try to, in every workplace these days, I actually tell people in the first week of a new job, if you start hearing me making noises, we can go into all my tics and all of that whenever you like. But I sort of, tell new workmates, you might hear this is what I have. I try and do that as much as I can. Sometimes maybe 4 times out of 5, if someone comments in public, I sniff a lot. And if people offer me a tissue, or if they ask if I have a cold, most of the time I say, no, I have Tourette, so I can't help that. Sometimes if I'm just not in the mood, or I'm just sick of talking about it, or I just don't want to talk to a stranger about it, I'll just say, yeah, I've got a cold, or I've got hay fever, or no, I'm fine, thanks. Or, so I just avoid it. But most of the time, I'm pretty empowered by it. And I actually had a boss at my radio job. My first major stepping stone in that career was I was assistant producing the breakfast radio show at one of the major metropolitan morning shows. It was a huge career break, and I was nervous all the time. And my boss knew I had Tourette's, and she started listening for my tics, and she could tell when I was stressed, and she would call me into her office and say, what's wrong? What's bothering you? And so part of that was great because she was looking out for me, but the other part of it was a little bit frustrating because I just wanted to be able to move through the world and not have people aware that I was stressed out, or I didn't want to have giveaway signs. Usually it was only my mum, and now it's my partner who can tell if my tics are flaring up, and he'll usually ask me, is anything bothering you? Is everything okay? And sometimes something is bothering me, and other times there isn't, and I just want to kind of let loose and let my body do whatever it wants, and there's no reason. So
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of a cycle right there too, because at least in my case, if there is any stress or anxiety, that kind of triggers tics for me. And if I feel especially self-conscious, then that might also kind of play into that. I mean, how do you, I feel that you could get stuck in this sort of like feedback loop of being stressed out and then being further stressed out because other people can pick up on it.
Yes. And it goes back to that childhood thing of if my mum would have pointed out, it would sort of half keep me aware of it and try and keep it under control, but also the other half would be nervous about it, and then it would make it worse. So it's a paradox.
Yeah. So, I mean, is that the key trigger to your tics or situations of stress or anxiety? Or, I mean, have you kind of found patterns in that?
Yeah, pretty much just the umbrella of stress or anxiety, or sometimes a new environment, as I said before about a new workplace, just a change. So at my current job, it's in its 3rd season on air, and I worked on both seasons 1 and 2. And this 3rd season, we had some staffing changes, and even just having new people sitting near my desk, was enough to have my tics sort of flare up that first week of work, because I didn't know what was going to happen, and I was hyper aware of, what people would think of me, and then which is stress as well, but it's just new, changes in environments.
Yeah.
Or sometimes complete silence. So one of the most amazing things about working in radio is the radio was on in the office 24 hours a day. So it was like a blanket of noise to kind of mask a lot of my tics, and I loved it. And sometimes in workplaces where there's no radio, I'll ask to bring in a radio and play it, but then everyone's got different music tastes, so you don't want to be the one to decide that. But I hate offices where you have to work in complete silence, because then I feel like every single tic stands out.
Yeah, that's the same with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you try to mask or manage your tics, or any way to kind of manipulate them to kind of blend in? Or
well, I think over the years they've evolved. I don't know how this happened. I don't really understand how it happened, but over the years, they've morphed into noises that sound like quote unquote normal bodily noises. So I sniff and I clear my throat, and those are the two major ones. And actually for ages I didn't even realize I was clearing my throat. One of my colleagues said, "Oh, is that one of your tics?" And I said, no, I've just got a tickle in my throat. And then I realized that the more I did that, the more I had a tickle in my throat and the more I had to clear my throat, and then it kind of became a tic. And so most people that hear that think, oh, I've got a cold or I've got something in my throat or I've inhaled dust or something. So
right, yeah.
And I've got a few tics that you can't hear or see. It's sort of internal twitches that I actually, until I just said it right then, had completely forgotten about. But now that I think about it, that would always happen. I just don't even think about it anymore.
Yeah, I have a lot of internal tics and sort of muscular tics that some of which are just totally in the background for me. I do them all the time, but they're kind of in the background, so they don't necessarily, I don't feel like they get in my way or they're in front of me. But I was interviewing a guy last night, and we had a lot of the same sort of invisible tics.
Yeah.
And they got out in front of me for the rest of the night. I was doing them. I was sort of, ritualizing them in a way, and like a certain way that I'll have to like move my arm and my muscles around my sort of shoulder and armpit area, yep. And I had to do it right to for my brain to kind of let me go. But yeah, that's been one of my worries in doing this podcast. Is it's going to make me more aware of some of my tics that maybe don't bother me, and then maybe old tics that I had will kind of come back and reappear. So your tics have evolved over time. I mean, did they used to be more intense, or if they're sort of more kind of normal looking or appearing now, did they used to be less so? Or
yes, and actually, I just remember then that I blink as well. But I guess I do extra blinks. So and that can sort of disguise itself. It's, and again, often I would feel guilty discussing my Tourette's because when it was diagnosed, it said in the diagnosis that it was mild. So I felt, well, okay, I can't complain too much because a lot of people have it a lot worse off than me. Mm-hmm. And obviously I would see it depicted in pop culture, and I knew how bad it seemed to be in a fictional context. So I guess they were worse in my youth, and when I was in primary school there were some grunts, like probably at my worst, some grunts that there's just no nice way to hear those or live through those. And then there was a sniff, and some of these, again, I worry if I start doing them, then they'll come back. So there was a sniff that I would do where I would sort of lift my upper lip and it would touch my nose. So like my upper lip would sniff into my nose, and that was a big one for years. And then now it's just a sniff. I don't know how that evolved, but it did. And there were some bigger sort of bodily jerks that I'm remembering around about the years when I was starting to learn to drive. So in Australia that was on my own, driving on my own. Legally from 18 you can drive on your own. And so from age 18 to 21 maybe, I think I remember being very conscious of my physical bodily jerks in the car because and my blinks, because I didn't want to have my eyes closed for too long. So or I didn't want to jerk too much in the car. So I was really aware of that. And I'm glad I was sort of trying to it's almost like you're trying to redirect. I don't know. I actually don't know. Is it common for tics to change and evolve?
It's funny. So they definitely change and evolve with me. I didn't know if it was common or not, but for almost everybody I've talked to, that's been the case. And they've all, I won't say all, but a lot of them have found ways to kind of, make their tics work for their routine in a way. So if there's something that is especially interfering or painful, they've over time found a way to, and this is not universally true, but they found some sort of way to maybe adapt it or shift it to where they can get the same sort of, satisfaction. They're still scratching the same itch, so to speak, but but the tick is a little bit more pleasant or less of a nuisance. So talk with somebody who had like a throat clearing kind of thing that would really cause pain after a while, and then found another way to kind of get the same effect, but without it being so painful.
And it feels like I'm betraying the disorder when you say things like that, because the whole definition of it is that you can't control it and it's involuntary, and it almost feels dangerous when you start saying that. And I know that I think it confused my boyfriend for a number of years without
it's like, so you can control it.
Yeah. And for years for the first couple of years we didn't live together. And then when we started living together, he would get a bit frustrated, like, oh, your tics are really loud and I don't understand. Like he would get confused because he knew that I could control them in a workplace, or if I'm on stage or talking on the radio or whatever. And then I had to one day, like, it was a couple of years before I said, no, actually, I go through the whole world and my whole day thinking about it and worrying about it and trying to keep it under control. And finally I get into my own front door and surrounded by my walls, and I can just make whatever noise I want and my body can do whatever it wants. And it's almost like the lid comes off and everything comes flying out. And sometimes there's no reason. Sometimes there's not a particular thing that sets me off. It's just my body gets to have a break.
That's a good way of saying it, that the lid comes off, because I kind of maybe abstractly picture it that way, of like the spring-loaded snake kind of flying out of the can, because I will, and again, I mean, there's really no controlling it, and for anybody listening, that's definitely not where I was going with it, of ways to manage it, but in terms of controlling it and shutting it off, no way. And I'll definitely go through my day and I'll be at a meeting of, so I kind of work with other government officials, and I'll be at a meeting where I'll find a way to maybe kind of disguise it, but when I get in my car and I drive back to the office or I drive home, then it's it's party time for my tics.
Yes, it's party time.
So what are the occasions, I mean, you mentioned some of the occasions where you inform people that you have Tourette's, like in the work environment.
Yes.
How does, do you just kind of bring it up as a housekeeping kind of thing, or what are the occasions where you feel like you have to inform people? This might take a little bit of reiteration, but how do people typically receive it? I mean, and I think you've kind of gone into that a little bit too, but just curious as to how, generally people handle that information, and if it's affected how they treat you in terms of, maybe your intelligence level, or, because the thing that I'm always worried about is when I tell somebody, say, if I tell my boss or if I tell other people around, my office, that they're going to start treating me with a new degree of sensitivity that makes me uncomfortable or just kind of gets me wrong.
I think I go a bit in the other direction. I get a bit paranoid if they don't say anything. So I'll often tell people I work with, particularly because a lot of the jobs I have as a freelancer, I'm already working with some of the other people I already know. So it might only be a couple of new people that I'm telling. Everyone else usually knows. But often I will just either, if they hear me, if someone offers me a tissue or if they ask if I've got a sore throat or something, that's when I'll say, oh, actually I've got Tourette's. Or in one job I actually emailed everyone in our immediate vicinity and just told them, if you hear this, this is what happens. And then, but I usually prefer to do it verbally, because then you can have a dialogue about it. The tricky part with my industry is that it's comedic. So everyone I encounter expects me to be joking about it. And I do joke about it, but I often hear someone use it as a punchline in my line of work. And I immediately, the reflex of, I have it, you can't joke about it. Like, so and it's actually, I don't know how people feel about it, but I don't let people get away with using Tourette's as a punchline.
Awesome. Yeah.
Because it's such an easy crutch for people to lean on as a punchline. And even
you're right. It's so cheap.
Yeah, and even the other day, one of my colleagues who I adore and is great, commented on someone yelling something out and said, "Oh, it's like you had Tourette's," and she didn't mean it as a punchline. She just said it as an observation. But I just said you can't use it like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't even have a dialogue with her about it, which is probably not great. But it's almost like, yeah, I just tell people you're not allowed to because I said
I almost
you
feel
can't.
like it's almost like the sort of like awareness combat, you know, used to kind of start within the comedy writers industry. I mean, do you feel kind of, I feel like you could do some like recon in that regard, because you're right. It's such an easy joke, and it's in so many different, you know, stand-up acts and TV shows and movies where, you know, there's like a cursing fit and someone says, "Oh, it's my Tourette's acting up again." And then that's the big laugh. And I've said this in other interviews with people. There's a really good sensitivity out there in society today to a lot of things that people go through, but somehow Tourette's has still kind of, you know, become this. It's been preserved for the comedy writers, and I don't really know. I guess it's just because the portrayals are so extreme and it's so freakish to people who don't necessarily know better. And so it still kind of has this safe place in jokes where, you know, most other disorders, I don't know if most is the right word, but many other disorders where people can't help what they have you don't joke about that because it's extremely insensitive, and it's just, but here we are.
I can't wait to listen to if you've had any chats with people who actually have those vocalizations in their tics, and to hear their response to that sort of depiction. Because I often, and I feel guilty saying this, but it's a reality. Like growing up, I would say, "Oh, it's okay, I don't have the swearing kind," or when I swear, it's because I mean it, you know, or it's okay, it's not the really bad. And so I would almost sort of be relieved and say to people, "It's okay, it's not that really bad kind that you see in the movies." Yeah, but then that sort of took away the opportunity to explain what I did have, and you know, the types of feelings I would have, and how it's all connected and very similar.
So this interview with Vaya was recorded before any of the past episodes had aired, but we do have a really good discussion about this in particular in episode 3 with Melissa C. Water. Please go back and listen to it.
Has anyone yet mentioned, this is my favorite portrayal of Tourette Syndrome. I'm not sure. I would love to think I'm the first person to mention this. Phoebe in Wonderland, the movie.
You're the first person to mention it.
Okay, excellent. Okay, this is a gem. Okay, everyone who listens has to immediately go and buy and watch Phoebe in Wonderland. And by me promoting it, I'm already ruining the ending because she doesn't kind of get diagnosed till the end. But it's Elle Fanning when she's little. She's about, 10 or 11, maybe even younger, maybe 8 or 9. And I think she has Tourette's and obsessive compulsive disorder, which is, they are connected. And I do have a few, I do exhibit a few of the symptoms of OCD at times. And so it follows her. And it's weird because I don't really know what the target audience for that movie is. It's not really for kids, but it's not just for parents because there's lots of kids. So she's in the school play and she doesn't fit in at school, and she's a bit unusual. The other kids are picking on her, and she's got a bit of echolalia as well, and she repeats some words, and she has to wash her hands a lot, and then she gets cast as Alice in the school play, and she can suddenly I'm not even really doing it any justice, but I just love the subtlety of how her tics are shown and the amazing way. I don't know how that kid got into the body of a child with Tourette's, but she really got into the anxiety and showed the anxiety of it and the fact that she couldn't control it, and she's crying because she doesn't know how to explain to her mum that it's not her fault, she can't help it, and but then she's got this amazing drama teacher that is really supportive of her, and it's just one of the most beautiful depictions. And at the very end of the movie, and I'm ruining it, but that's okay, it's still great, she gets up in front of her class and says what she has and explains to the other kids what she has. And it's triumphant.
Oh man, I have to see it because I've I guess intentionally avoided movies or depictions of Tourette's, but mainly because I'm worried that it's just gonna that is just going to make me upset, or I'm just not going to be, because even if somebody tells me like, oh, it's really, really good, it's usually coming from somebody who doesn't have it. And this might still fit into the category of the pop culture depiction.
Yeah.
Or the extreme depiction, and one thing I've kind of had to wrestle with this podcast is in sort of setting the definition of Tourette's and setting context for it. I don't want to isolate people who really do have the extreme symptoms, because it's very real to a small percentage of people who have Tourette's with the coprolalia and other more intense bodily motions, and I've interviewed a couple people who do have that, but they also they completely get it, that the people with mild cases who still have a lot to deal with in the context of their own lives, and how there is that isolation there. But I feel like that's something I'm still kind of wrestling with, where I don't want to kind of marginalize or take away or isolate anybody who does have a more severe form of it.
Yeah, it's a spectrum like anything, any disorder. And like my mum has rheumatoid arthritis, and she often feels that guilt when she pulls up to take a disabled parking spot and she gets out of her car and she can walk, and it looks like she's not entitled to that spot, but she's in a lot of pain, and it's that invisible disability that she grapples with a lot because people don't see it. And so, but you sort of wrestle with that, but I don't have it as bad as some people, or I'm not as visually impacted as some people. So it's a lot harder to define, but everyone's struggle is different, and, it's okay that it's a spectrum. And I feel connected a lot, like, to everyone on every end of the Tourette spectrum. And I is that whistling my phone or your phone? I just heard a bit of a whistle.
Oh, actually, you know what? It might be my microphone picking up my dog in the background, potentially.
I sometimes, if I'm out in a shop and I hear someone else with a vocal tick, I have that immediate feeling of camaraderie. I feel connected to that person. Like, I know what you have. I know what you're going through. And I won't ever acknowledge it. I won't even really look at the person, but you just sort of, you have that moment of in that second you're connected to that person. And there's someone actually I know at the moment who every now and then I hear a bit of a verbal tick, and he's not formally diagnosed or anything, and I don't think he quite knows what it is, but and you don't want to sort of say, hey, I know what you've got, or you might have what I have, but you can sort of, I don't know, you move through the world and you're aware of other people's experience. It's almost like a frequency that you can tap into.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, you mentioned the sort of youth support group organization when you were younger that you kind of distanced yourself from. Do you know anybody or many people at all who have Tourette's in your adult life?
Not really, no. Apart from my mum, but she doesn't really exhibit it very overtly.
Well, so I want to get to your podcast real quick.
Yes.
So just I guess set that up.
Yes. So I host a recap podcast about an Aussie soap called Neighbours, which at the moment is most famous for producing Oscar nominee Margot Robbie. And I watch the episodes of the soap and then I recap them with my co-hosts, and we overanalyze them and discuss the tropes of a soap opera, and then use them as a springboard to get into other issues and talk about our own lives, as most podcasts about pop culture do. And we won an award last year for the sort of the first big Australian podcasting awards, and we won the TV, entertainment and pop culture category. So that was pretty exciting.
Nice.
Pretty exciting for something you make out of your living room.
Nice. Yeah. Congrats.
Thanks. So, and it's just really great to produce and have complete ownership over something, and you don't have a radio station, you're not begging someone for airtime. I always felt like this is a classic literature reference, but I always felt like Mary from The Secret Garden asking for a little bit of earth in a corner of the garden so she could plant something. I just always felt like I was begging my bosses for airtime, and now with podcasting, you can just give it to yourself.
Right. Yeah. No, I love it. I love the sort of restriction-free thing that we can chat like this and not have to, obey to a format or say, okay, hold on, we got to go to a break. And it's so relaxed and unregulated. I love that. So you talk about your personal lives. Has Tourette's, have you brought that up at all, or?
Very rarely. It's quite strange because I talk about everything. Again, I think it must come down to the fact that I feel like I don't have the right to sometimes. I don't know, because I just don't wear it as a badge. And I think maybe because for a few years I did stand-up comedy for a few years in Melbourne on the Melbourne comedy scene it was with a friend of mine. We were a duo, and I think I just deliberately avoided it as a punchline, so it never really came up in my material.
Yeah.
And I kind of just saved it. I've been sort of hanging on to it. And there's a few things I want to do with it. Like I want to write some fiction where it features. But I've just sort of kept it to myself for the most part because unless it actually comes up and, someone mentions the word or
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but I edit my tics out of the podcast, but there's not many of them, just a few sniffs or
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to ask if that was going to be this time-consuming, tape cutting or.
No, it's the same as someone saying or someone stopping to have a drink of water. It's
right.
It's as intrusive as that. You just snip it out.
Well, what haven't we gotten to? I mean, is there anything that I haven't asked about that you think's important, or something I might have missed along the way, or?
Probably. No, I'm just actually trying to wonder about my geography and if it was about where in the world it was sort of more commonly talked about. I don't know. I'm your first Australian guest, so I just always felt wherever I went, I kind of felt, I don't know, so unique. Like I had this, it almost felt a bit like a magic, like a supernatural element to me. So, and like, growing up, I used to do this thing. This is super, like, I barely tell anyone this. So but I did this thing where I would wring my hands together, and I would sort of like imagine the pictures in my head. Doesn't make any sense, but so I would sort of kind of wring my hands together, and then I would, like, I might replay a TV show in my head, or I might imagine a scenario in my head, and I still kind of do that sometimes, but like sometimes my mum would catch me sort of wringing my hands together, and sometimes I would hold a doll, like I would clutch a doll and have the doll kind of, it's a very odd thing to explain because it doesn't make any sense, but I think
you're kind of getting to something that, okay, so continue, but there's something I want to ask you about.
So I don't even really know if it's connected to Tourette's, but I think it must be. But so for years as a kid, I thought I had this like power that I could imagine these things in my head. And then I could do these actions that no one else did. Like I would make noises that no one else would. And I was a bit overweight as a kid, and I've got an unusual name, Vaya. It's Greek. It's not very common. And so for a lot of my youth and into adulthood, I would just kind of move through this space like there was nobody else like me.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe that was a bit why I was a bit confronted when I heard of a youth group of a whole bunch of other kids that have what I had. I'm like, no, I'm not ready for that. This is my thing. But yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So the visualization part, now this is something that's come up a couple times.
Really? This is exciting.
And this came up last night with the guy I interviewed. So there are certain tics that we will do that have, that create a visual that's not directly connected to what we're actually doing. And we're trying to figure out, and I just haven't asked other people because I don't know, it just hasn't come up yet.
That's amazing.
But,
I've got tears in my eyes because I barely ever talk about it because it's such a strange thing. And
it's a really strange thing. I don't know what inspires. So here's what he said.
Yeah.
He's got this certain tic, this certain sort of muscular movement sort of tic that makes him picture a metal drawer kind of opening. And every time he does it, it's like the drawer is opening. And with me, when I do, so the tick I mentioned earlier, where I kind of have to kind of contort my sort of shoulder, armpit, kind of side area, I picture this piece of driftwood on a beach, this like sun-bleached piece of driftwood on a beach. And it's basically kind of from a memory that I saw when I was a kid, but I feel like the tick I'm doing carries the shape of that piece of driftwood that kind of looks like a piece of pulled chewing gum or something like that. It's and there are other things like that too. And I don't want to get, too far into the weeds with that because it starts to sound really, just kind of out there.
It sounds supernatural.
There are a lot of those.
Yeah, it sounds like something from the X-Files. You can't explain it.
Yeah, it's strange because a lot of this stuff, like I don't know what inspires the visual, but if I hear a certain kind of sound, there's a visual component to it. I picture what I think that sound looks like.
Yeah.
And I have this one tick where I try to get to the lowest note that I can possibly hit with my voice to where I just make kind of like a gravelly sound, and I have to do it the right way. And doing it the right way corresponds with a picture that looks kind of like a broken line. And if I do it to where it looks like this perfect broken line, then I've satisfied the tick and I can move on.
Wow.
But But it's kind of weird because that's one of these things that's sort of just always processed in my mind in the background and has never really occurred to me as anything to really think of and analyze because maybe, who knows, maybe everybody with Tourette's does that kind of thing. But but I've never talked about it.
Same. And the visualization thing for me as a kid, like I loved writing stories and I was creative. And for me, part of me felt like I was cheating because I thought that I could just visualize them in my head and sort of wring my hands together and see this picture and then write it down in story writing class. And then it almost, again, it's like a soap opera. I would always pick up where I left off and or play that same scenario over and over. So and sometimes it would be characters and sometimes it would be real people and and it would be sometimes certain physical things would not trigger it, but I would latch on to. So it might be if I was watching a TV show and a character was wearing a dress that was particularly flowy or had hair that was hanging a certain way or swishing a certain way, that physicality I would kind of connect with. And then I would like next time I had my doll and I was playing with the doll or wringing my hands together, I would picture that same kind of character moving with the hair flick. And it was just little details like that I would want to repeat.
Man, that's so fascinating. And it's funny talking like this. I'm kind of thinking like, I hope I'm not offending the hard work of researchers who are like, dude, where have you been? This is like, well, we all know this stuff already, this visual thing. We've already documented that.
Welcome to the Lazy
I'm talking about it like it's a,
Welcome to Lazy Tourette's podcast. We don't Google anything.
I know. I'm ignorant to the world of Tourette's and have lived with it my whole life. But that's kind of part of this. I want to sort of develop my sense of context and kind of where I am in that world and kind of what's out there instead of just kind of living privately with it. And that's kind of like, that's one of the bottom lines for this podcast.
Well, I'm really excited now. I want to talk to people that visualize as it's some kind of, I don't even want to call it a tick because it doesn't feel like a tick. But the youth group I was too shy to join as a teenager, I want to join now on Twitter and I want to talk to people. It's opened up the world now.
Well, I mean, I'm really grateful that, you made time to talk because it's the more I talk with people, the kind of closer I get to maybe sort of understanding the quirks and the vague parts of my Tourette's that seem like this is something that's completely unique to me, but oh wait, no, it's not. There are a lot of other people who do the exact same weird, obscure thing that I thought I was alone in the world in doing. Yeah,
and it's so easy to fall into the pattern of explaining the most obvious tics to people. Right, yep, I sniff, I blink, I clear my throat. Okay, that's what I do. But then you forget about all the vague and the nuanced movements and
All right, that was such a cool episode, such a fun conversation. I'm going to have a link in the show notes to this episode, to the Neighbors podcast with Vaya. That's the podcast she hosts. I'd love to hear your feedback to this episode, to this podcast episode. things that came up, or insights, or just personal experiences from Vaya, just weigh in. I think I'm about to lose my voice here. My email is tourettespodcast@gmail.com. This podcast totally fails if there's no outside conversation around it. So far, so good, though. Thank you so much for all the emails and tweets and conversation that I've learned so much from, even as a person with Tourette Syndrome. Just hearing what other people with Tourette Syndrome go through and how it's often also extremely similar to my experience. But I love finding these common denominators by having conversations with other people who have Tourette Syndrome. So send me your thoughts, send me an email. Again, tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Let me know if I can read your email on the show. Actually, I just got one from someone named Lorenzo. He says, I'm a fellow Touretter from Canada who was diagnosed very late in life, and it has been an obstacle and hindrance my whole life until my neurologist was able to find the correct medication for me. What people need to know is that Tourette's is neurologically based, variable, not the same for everyone. And even though it is not life-threatening, it sure can be, as I like to say, living-threatening. Thanks again for getting the proper word out in the public, and I look forward to continue listening. That was from Lorenzo. Thank you so much. Also, I know there are emails I haven't gotten to respond to yet. I'm really, really sorry. I promise I'm catching up to it. I get really excited each time I get an email about this podcast, and this is coming from someone who wasn't sure how far this podcast was going to get out there. And I'm just stoked that it has, and it's all thanks to you. So if you've emailed me, I promise I'm going to reply to you. May not be the same day, but I promise to reply. And also, if you don't have Tourette Syndrome and you've happened upon this podcast, what are your thoughts? I feel like that's an important part to cover. Well, welcome and thanks for listening, first of all, seriously. But what are your takeaways? If you just found this podcast randomly, what do you think about the conversations you've heard here? I really want to know that. Obviously, awareness more broadly is important to people who have Tourette's, so let me know. I think that's going to be it for this week. Another one next Friday, every Friday. tourettespodcast.libsyn.com. Libsyn is spelled Libsyn. tourettespodcast.libsyn.com. Or just subscribe on iTunes to make it easy. My Twitter handle is @Tourette'sPod, and you can find the iTunes link on the tweet pinned to the top of my page there. It also comes up in the iTunes search pretty easily. Thank you. Keep in touch. Keep emailing. Talk to you again soon. This is Ben.